Hi everyone, I'm excited to tell you about my term project. The theme here is a conservation prioritization for the Dee Watershed of South Carolina. So a little bit of context here, I work for the Dee Land Trust. It's a regional land trust that works with private landowners to put conservation easements onto their properties. And our focal area, as the name would suggest, is defined by the Dee Watershed of northeastern South Carolina. So this 14 county region shown here in the map contains all the major waterways of the greater Dee River watershed, and they all converge down here on the coast at Winyah Bay. Within this watershed region, most of the communities are rural, they're agrarian. Forestry is a huge income for a lot of these communities, and the natural resources for hunting and fishing and recreating are really important to the people who live here. But these resources and these ways of lives are threatened by development pressure from places like Myrtle Beach on the coast, as well as Charlotte, North Carolina, which is just over the border from us. They want to take action now to protect their land, but especially given the current political climate, the funding that the land trust goes for to these grants that help private landowners put conservation easements on their properties, the funding is limited. The resources that we've used for so long, might not always be there. So there's this growing need to develop some conservation tools to help us prioritize where should we really be focusing our money and our staff time and our efforts to have the biggest conservation payoff in terms of protecting land. This led me to develop my project objective for this term project. So I wanted to create a prioritization matrix that would be a great tool for just decision making and thinking through conservation approaches for the region. To get this project started, I identified the top resources that we're interested in protecting. So that's based on the needs and the interests of people who live in the watershed, as well as the mission statement of my land trust. And so I narrowed it down to 5 categories. Once I had these top resources in mind, I started looking for authoritative data resources. Then I developed this conservation prioritization matrix. So this is essentially taking those 5 top resources we want to protect and then bringing in the data to see how this can rank or score overall. Then getting into the details, once I had my data gathered and I had an idea of where I wanted to end up with my analysis, I started manipulating the data. So some of my sources were vector data, and for a lot of those, what I ended up doing was creating buffers or like zones of priority, where say we have our existing protected lands. I wanted to prioritize protecting new areas that were close to the existing protected areas. So I created kind of buffer zones out from those cores of existing protected land. In a lot of these cases, I was taking the prepared vector data, adding an attribute field that I could then score with the point value according to that prioritization matrix. And then I was using that attribute as the value field for the feature to raster tool. When I was converting the vector data into a raster, there would of course be the cells in the raster where the vector data had been, but then the rest of the raster was blank, essentially no data. And so I used a combination of the isNull tool and then the con tool, that's short for conditional tool, to basically identify the blank spaces in the raster and then set those blank spaces to a value of 0. Some of my other data sources were already rasters, and so I just had to manipulate the data type of the raster. I ended up using raster calculator a lot to be able to extract specific pieces of data from source rasters. Then for my semifinal and my final layers, I used the cell statistics tool to sum everything together, all those source rasters that I had prepared. I had mapped it out, so I just wanted them to add the cell values together. And I use the rescale by function tool and zonal statistics for some of the kind of final data tweaking and manipulating the final product. Through these workflows, I created several final products. The first of all being this land use change analysis. I knew from my research and from my personal experience that there was development pressure in the watershed, but I wanted, as a proof of concept, I wanted to see if I could quantify that in some way. So I used the land cover data sets from 2003 and 2023 to kind of look at this 20-year time window and use the change detection wizard within ARC to basically find where the land cover or land use changed between those years. And unsurprisingly, Horry County, which is where Myrtle Beach is located, had the most development in every metric that I looked at. This is my favorite map that I made through the project. So these are my 5 kind of semi-final layers that eventually went into the final prioritization. But so for each of those top resources that we're concerned about protecting, this is kind of how the priority maps out for each of those. Finally, we have the overall conservation prioritization. So this is all 5 of those metrics, many of which had multiple data endpoints, all sandwiched together into this final output where I've blacked out the existing protected lands and then the areas from low conservation priority where there were not many overlapping factors all the way up to the dark green, which are the high conservation priority areas. So I see 2 main ways to use this prioritization map. The first way would be prescriptive. So me working at the land trust, I might be approached by a landowner who has a discrete tax parcel and they want to know if they can put a conservation easement on it. So I can take this particular property in mind and I can pop it into our priority map and literally see how it ranks, how does it score, stack up. So that's what I did here in this example. So I just took a hypothetical parcel here and used the zonal statistics tool to look at, okay, what's the mean score in the overall prioritization for this parcel that might be protected, and it was 8.67 out of 10 possible points. That's great. That would totally go to the top of my work stack. Then the second way I envision using this tool is prospecting. So this is where I don't have a particular area in mind. I'm just going to visually assess the map and see what areas are underrepresented. Where do we need to focus more proactive efforts for outreach, education, trying to engage with new potential conservation landowners. Let's take a closer look at Florence County. Zooming into the map, we can really see where there might be gaps. Again, these blacked out areas, those lands have already been protected, but then the darker green color means that more factors were overlapping there. It's better, it would be a higher priority for conservation. This was a really fun project. A lot of my rationale for how I approached this was I wanted it to be a proof of concept. Because this is relevant to my job and I do get to do a fair amount of GIS work in my job, I really wanted to take this time to try out some different tools and workflows so that I could see what made sense with the data that I could find and how to turn it into some kind of usable final deliverable. For a few of the input metrics, I did struggle to find multiple authoritative data sources that I wanted to incorporate into the analysis. So I think particularly for forestry, I would really like to revisit that paper we looked at earlier in the semester about the cost of transporting timber from where it's harvested to the mill where it gets processed. We've had some mill closures in South Carolina that are really, really putting pressure on the viability of our forestry industry, which is a huge supplier of jobs for a lot of these rural communities. So I would love to revisit that paper and maybe replicate that analysis a little bit, or come up with kind of a pared down version that I could use to flesh out my forestry layer in this prioritization and really get some more depth and utility out of that. Overall, I'm satisfied with the project and really satisfied with just how I tested out some analysis tools and utilized some things that I learned throughout the semester in the class. I kind of updated my strategy a little bit. Here's my literature cited, and I just want to say thanks everybody for your help in the group chat this semester, and I'm really excited to see what everyone else has been working on and see your final maps.